In tonight's Dorchester segment, we catch up on what's happening with plans for a new library and a new take on financial problems at UMass Boston. To fill us in is the news editor of the Dorchester Reporter, Jennifer Smith. Thank you very much for being with us again, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
I want to start with another education story, and this is about a middle school and a high school that are being merged, and this is, I guess, a better plan than an earlier plan, right?
So as people will recall, the McCormick School on Columbia Point was one of a few that have been struggling over recent years. And as part of the Boston Public Schools plan to eliminate middle schools and basically have a more streamlined assignment system for grades, one of the thoughts was that the McCormick School would either close entirely or move to South Boston. And there was a lot of pushback on that plan, as you would imagine. So what's ended up being the latest proposal through the Build BPS plan is actually that the McCormick School would end up merging with the Leadership Academy, and they would end up just kind of moving over to Roslindale, the Irving School in Roslindale, from 20 to 2022 before moving back into a totally remodeled new facility at the McCormick School in 2022. So the thinking here, as opposed to the earlier plan, which is that they kind of consolidated two lower performing schools and then moved them into South Boston, the logic here is that they would take the McCormick School, which has been struggling, and combine it with the Leadership Academy, which has been doing pretty well, and take that kind of partnership and then move it into, again, a new facility that's familiar to the McCormick community, and hopefully that transition would be a little bit easier and the resources would be used a little bit better.
And if I recall, one of the problems with the earlier plan, at least for the McCormick constituency, was that they were going to be exiled from this building and then it was going to be fixed up for somebody else.
Yes, again, the thinking was that it was going to become a separate high school that they weren't necessarily going to be benefiting from.
Turning to UMass Boston, I think that this is a story that's been kicked around for a number of years by now. Boston Globe uncovered this financial shortcoming or something, and there was an audit, and now the Pioneer Institute comes out and says, well, the Globe and the UMass trustees got it wrong. Explain this.
So this is kind of a long and engaged story that has been going on for a few years, but very much reared its head this week with the Pioneer Institute coming out with a new report. And just for context, again, the Pioneer Institute is a free market-oriented think tank. It and UMass leadership have butted heads in the past, so this isn't the first time this has happened. But so what happened back in 2016 and 2017 was there was this discovery that there was a $30 million shortfall of some sort in the UMass budget. And there was kind of some confusion about where that came from. A report, an audit that was conducted or solicited by UMass Boston, by KPMG, discovered that or determined that it was basically reckless management on the UMass Boston campus and how they were handling their budgeting that led to this shortfall. And in the wake of that, then Chancellor Keith Motley ended up resigning, and some people consider it an ouster, and some people kind of consider it just mismanagement leading to someone who was in charge of the school leaving his position. Now, what the Pioneer Institute alleges is that it wasn't actually that there was poor budget management alone happening on the UMass Boston campus. They say that the Board of Trustees, which of course has to approve any capital spending, so if there's a really big, ambitious capital plan, the Board of Trustees and the President's office had to sign off on that. The Chancellor can't do that unilaterally. And what the Pioneer Institute says is that there was actually some sort of math error where the Board of Trustees and the central office actually miscalculated the health of the financial situation at UMass Boston, discovered that mistake, freaked out, ordered the university, the campus, to actually replenish its reserves, and then decided that was a $30 million deficit. As soon as this report came out, UMass Boston and the central office did immediately push back and say there was no order to replenish the reserves. This was, in fact, a long-time issue with the budgeting process. President Marty Meehan of UMass stood by his earlier comments based on the KPMG report and said that it was, again, kind of an issue of budget mismanagement. Interim Chancellor Catherine Newman just yesterday actually came out with a statement and said this was not an accounting error, this was not a mistake, this was not an illusion. There is, in fact, a significant deficit, and the campus is working toward it to fix it. So it is kind of a tangled issue. UMass and UMass Boston's position is basically that the Pioneer Institute either misunderstood or willfully looked at kind of odd numbers and interpreted it in a strange way. And the Pioneer Institute says that it's not actually against UMass, no matter what UMass says, but in fact it still says that there was some sort of miscalculation and the Board of Trustees and the President's office were not held fully accountable for the role they played in the crisis. So I'd imagine this will kind of continue to be a back and forth over the next few weeks or so, but it is a little bit of a new chapter in this chaos.
This has been News. We're talking with Jennifer Smith from the Dorchester Reporter. And even a longer story maybe is how long people in Uphams Corner have been trying to get a new branch library, and there's a new plan.
There is. For anyone that is in Uphams Corner, there is a current library for the village, but it's down in the basement of another building, and it's not very large. So as part of the Imagine Boston 2030 plan, if you recall, a few years ago, Mayor Martin Walsh announced that there were going to be several new library investments. And as part of this sort of revitalization program study that they're planning for Uphams Corner, they also budgeted an $18 million new library that was going to go there. It's a combination on the site of an old bank building and a parking lot that's right next door. And what's been interesting in the community planning process for not just those parcels, but a few others that are nearby, the city, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, and also kind of community leaders in general have been saying, we think that a library alone may not be the best use for this site. You know, we are in a land crunch right now. Can we do something else with it as well? So what the city is doing right now, which is pretty interesting and new for them, is they're finalizing language for a request for proposals, so guidelines for any developers who take over, saying that this is the library plan. There must be a library on the first floor of this building, but what they'd like to see is housing that ends up going above it, because affordable housing was a huge, huge issue in the planning process. And this is actually the first time that the city has actually pursued putting housing as an active plan above a public library. It's not unprecedented in recent terms as far as the conversation goes. If you recall, there was another library proposal at Fields Corner that floated the idea of housing or a community space above the library. And David Leonard, president of the Boston Public Library System, says that we may be looking at something similar for the new Chinatown library as well. So the city of Boston has a pretty interesting trend going there.
This is an area, Uphams Corner and the adjoining Dudley Triangle area, that has been in a road to recovery for the past few decades. But if you go back before that, it almost died, as one of your contributors reported. Talk about that story by Bob Haas.
Yeah, so Bob Haas basically traced this history of this one street in Uphams Corner and how it did almost sort of fade away during the many decades, and he's been doing a series for us and kind of tracing the history of his street, his neighborhood, his village, and he has the second portion of that, which we'd previously published an earlier version of it. So he has a very long, lovely feature stemming around a block party that was aimed at revitalizing this one stretch of Uphams Corner, and that is one of the features that we have in our Dorchester Day edition, which we're all very excited about because Dorchester Day, of course, is Sunday, and it was really a great opportunity to highlight some of the work that longtime activists have been doing and ended up saving this certain area. And it did tie in really, really nicely with the fact that they're slated for a whole new kind of investment. And
that's in the Virginia Monadnock Street area.
Yes.
I want to ask you about another story that you worked on. It made me feel very hungry. About a banh mi sandwich place near Savin Hill.
Yes.
What was that like?
So I love banh mi ballet, and in fact, many, many people in the city do. It routinely ranks up there with the best banh mi in the city, which for those who have never had it before, and they're poorer for it, the banh mi is a Vietnamese sandwich, and it's got this beautiful crispy crust and this pillowy center, and it's full of these wonderful seasoned meats and pickled vegetables, and it's Wonderful. And so banh mi ballet has been a staple in the Savin Hill area on Dorchester Avenue for many, many decades at this point. It pretty much keeps me from starving on a day-to-day basis. And I had the chance to go in and talk with Jennifer Wen, who took over the shop 25 years ago from her sister and has basically turned it into a staple of Vietnamese food in Boston. And I really did enjoy talking with her, in part because she's actually come into possession of the entire building and is going to be expanding next door so that the customers who until now have sort of had to hover around the lone table with 4 seats in that restaurant can actually have a chance to sit down and eat.
Now, for people who haven't experienced any of these places, you drive by them and say, oh, that's for the Vietnamese. But if you go inside there, it's a whole different, cross-section of people.
Yes, that's one thing that she actually spoke about at some length with me, is she's right up at the top of the area between Uptons Corner and Savin Hill that's actually home to the largest Vietnamese diaspora in the entire state, that area of Dorchester. And she was talking about how you've really seen the neighborhood change over the years, and on many times when I've been in there, it is not just Vietnamese community members who are in there, though of course it's, a prized store for them. It is young people who are just moving in, it's older families, it's people who are coming kind of from the other side of Dorchester Avenue. It really is both a sandwich shop, a market. They have great Vietnamese coffee and fruit juices there. It's very much a gathering place as well, except there's not really anywhere to sit and gather, so fortunately that's about to change.
I need a preview from you of one other thing coming up in a reporter about the local hip-hop scene. What's going on with that?
Yes, so our reporter Dan Sheehan, our news and features editor, actually has been taking a dive over the past few weeks into the burgeoning hip-hop scene in Dorchester through performances at the Strand to local open mic nights, and he's talked to a number of the kind of rising stars in that scene, like for instance Red Shades, and basically walked through how they feel about kind of carving out this space for themselves in the Boston music scene that has historically been a little bit unfriendly to hip-hop, and the thought that that might be changing in the future.
And lastly, and not the least important, you got a big day coming up on Sunday.
Dorchester Day. Yes, so the Dorchester Day Parade kicks off at 1 p.m. On the 2nd, June 2nd, first Sunday in June, and it's going to trace a huge swath from Dorchester Ave, down from Lower Mills, up almost all the way to Columbia Road. Come on out, it's a great time. Everyone's out there. We're hoping there's good weather, though I might have jinxed it. And we've got a full rundown, actually, of the parade route in the Dorchester Day edition of the paper, which you actually, Chris, helped contribute to with a history of the parade.
Yes, and a big thank you to the Dorchester Historical Society as well. And finally, if people want to follow the reporter or your own feed, what's the best way to do that?
You can either find us online at .news.com, you can buy us in print, of course, or you can follow us on Twitter at .news or me at jen.smith.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Of course, Chris.
Jennifer Smith from the Dorchester Reporter.